smooth cinematic drone footage is what you're after, then you're gonna need to understand about the drone's frame rate. What's up fam, Rahim here and welcome back to another episode of Tutorial Tuesdays. Great to have you guys joining me because in today's episode, I'll be sharing with you all you need to know about your drone's frame rates and I'll be using the DJI FPV. Actually, what I'll be sharing about the frame rates is applicable to all types of cameras. It's just that I want to mention about the DJI FPV because it has a low latency and high quality mode. So depending on which kind of mode you choose, you will get different frame rate options. Also, I'll touch a bit about shutter speed. Depending on which shutter speed you choose, you will get either a very sharp dynamic image or you want more of the motion blur kind of look. And then at the end of the episode, I'll let you know what are my settings and then so-called how I cheat the frame rate settings in the editing timeline. Now before I start, I need to kind of set the understanding about what is the cinematic base frame rate, right? So in the US, where they're using the NTSC video format, the base frame rate is gonna be 24 frames per second, or kind of nowadays they're also using 30 frames per second. But I'm in Singapore, which is using the PAL standard, right? So Asia generally is PAL standard, and that's gonna be 25 frames per second. Now I do not want to go too much into that because there's a lot of science and history behind that. Now if you want to know more about that, have a look at Potato Jet's video tutorial about going deeper into frame rates. Now I'll put a link down below. Yeah, check it out and do give him some love also. I've shot most of my drone footage gearing up to make content that is meant for 25 frames per second. So yeah, just to have that better understanding that that is my base. So if you're in the US or you're in regions that are using NTSC, then you should be looking at 24 FPS or 30 FPS. Now even as I'm talking about all these numbers, there is no option for this in the DJI FPV system itself, but don't worry about that. I'll let you know how you can cheat that in your editing. Alright, I'm gonna get started. No, don't click away. You can watch Potato Jet's video after my tutorial. Alright, thanks. So if you were to go into the settings of the DJI FPV, under the camera settings, you will see a option that you can choose either low latency or high quality. Now, as a FPV pilot, I'll choose low latency because I want my drone to react as quick as what I can give it input on the sticks. Alright, so I want as low as a delay. You can call that latency, a delay to how the signals are sent to the drone. The thing about that actually will limit the option that you have. Now you will see the resolution options of 4K, 1080. That choice is up to you, but of course you already know that low latency will equate to you will not get a 4K setting. So never mind, we stick with 1080 anyways, full HD. I record full HD most of the time. I rarely record in 4K anyways. Now there is a reason for that because the system has a lot to process, and if you're gonna be allowed to record 4K, the system may not be able to send you that quick of a signal to get that low latency in what you see in the goggles. So my base standard 1080 full HD, that's enough, and then you'll see the options of 50 FPS or 60 FPS. Now to have a better understanding about FPS, frames per second, is basically 25 photographs per second. So they deem it as frames. Now if you have 50 FPS, that means 50 photographs, 100 FPS, 100 photographs, so on and so forth, right? There's a doubling effect here. Now you see in the options, for me there's no 25 frames per second, but instead there's 50 FPS. Now it's perfectly fine. I'll let you know in the end how I cheat that portion, right? Now what's so good about 50 FPS is that I can slow it down by half a speed and the video will still look smooth, right? Never record anything in 25 FPS like your normal phone camera or a camcorder and take it 25 FPS and then you intend to slow it down. You will not have enough frames, right? You will only be like 12.5 frames per second. That empty gaps will show in your footage because you will see a lot of missing frames and a lot of shuddering in your video. Now this drone gives you the option to run up to 100 FPS. Now that means it can run your normal footage down to 0.25 of its actual speed. Now that's gonna be a really nice slow-mo footage. So now what's so special about high quality mode? It only gives you 4K at 50 FPS. What? Yes, something to note is that actually not many cameras that can deliver that kind of high quality and high frame rates at the same time, right? Those are left for more of the higher end professional level cameras. For this drone, there is that limitation, right? Now why would I want that 1/50th of a second shutter speed? Because it's got to do with the cinematic standard. Now if I run the base standard of 25 FPS, I'm gonna be using a 1/50th of a shutter speed. When these two are combined, you have the most realistic natural looking footage that you will ever have, and this is the so-called cinematic standard. I keep doing this, you get the point, Anyways, there's a lot of history to understand this 180 rule, they call it, right? I'll just put a link in the description also if you want to learn more. So coming back, if I wanted to shoot something more of a cinematic look, then I'll choose the 4K 50 FPS, and then I'll also choose the shutter speed of 1/50th of a second. I get the best resolution and I get the ideal shutter speed. By the way, on a bright day, if you have the shutter of 1/50th and ISO at the lowest sensitivity of ISO 100, you would have blown out the image. So that's where ND filters come along. That will be covered in a future episode, so do subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss it. So Rahim, then it doesn't match up. You got 50 frames per second with 1/50th of a second shutter speed. That's where I cheated in the system by, in the editing timeline, when I drop it in, I would choose the timeline of 25 frames per second. What that does is that when I finally export the footage, right, it will drop every other frame. Meaning to say it will throw away every other frame of that 50 FPS. Now it will become 25 FPS with empty gaps. But here's the thing, will you see the difference? No, you won't see, because now it's at the correct frame rate. From 50 become 25 FPS and at the correct shutter speed of 1/50th. That's how I end up with the shots that will have a cinematic look. Now of course this is the rule, but I'll take it more of a guideline. You can also call it that rules are meant to be broken. It really depends on how you want to portray your scene, because sometimes when I'm going slow, 25 FPS at 1/50th of a second does well, right? It looks good, the motion blur is enough, but sometimes I feel like maybe if I'm going very fast, now the motion blur is too much, then I want something that is a bit sharper. I'll choose a faster shutter speed, which will be 1/100th of a second. So depends, alright? So you experiment. There is one advice here I'd like to give you, is that unless you're making a music video, do not record in 30 FPS and then put it into a 25 FPS timeline. What's gonna happen is that you'll be missing 5 frames, the footage will be skipping and it won't look that good. Unless of course you're intending to go from 30 FPS, slow it down just a bit to match that 25 FPS, like what producers of music videos do. End of the day, it's how you want to portray your art. But of course, if in a production shoot, the producer tells you that he must need this kind of settings, then at least now you would have had a better understanding of how to set up your drone settings. Well anyways, I'm gonna wrap it up right here. Now if you've liked this video, do give me a thumbs up, subscribe if you're not already, chat with me, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Pilots, as always, I'll see you in the skies. Peace.